Dr. Sam Kelton Roberts.
I just wanted to say welcome to everyone. Thank you so much to all of you for coming and joining us on this finally being a warm weekend. I think you brought in good weather with you. Thank you so much. Not just to Barbara and to her co-conspirators in putting all this together as well, but to all of you who are participating. And also, more importantly, oh, thank you. Sorry. This is on? It's not that. Yeah. Oh, it's for the oh, gotcha. More importantly, I wanted to thank all of you who were participants in the events 30 years ago for what you did for this campus and for the world. And I say that particularly because as director of the Institute for Research in African American Studies, I'm acutely aware that our institutional history is directly linked in a causal way to what you all did. It was in 1993 when we were established after continuing student protests. And I think that the light that was lit in the mid-1980s just kept on going well after you graduated, and it burned for several years and ended up in many things, one of which was the establishment finally at Columbia University in a program in African American Studies. So in a lot of ways, I have you to thank for the position that I have right now. That's for better or for worse. Largely better, though. And you're also, and finally I want to say also, thank you for the example and the reminder that struggle always continues. We are a thriving program right now. We hope to move to be a department one day. We have peers at other institutions that have full PhD programs in African American Studies. We have a thriving master's program and a thriving undergraduate program, but not a PhD. We will move in that direction, but it will take continuous struggle. In fact, we might have some of you come back here and help us. Anyone up for a sit-in? We can do one after we get out of here. But you all are all the example that reminds us that struggle always must continue if we are to have progress. I want to say thank you for this weekend, but also thank you for the history and the future that you have provided us. Welcome.
Thank you. So I want to just echo that welcome to those of you who've taken out your Saturday, which turned out to be a lovely spring Saturday. Didn't necessarily know it was going to be that, or if we'd have snow, but to come here to be with us to reflect on the 1980s pre-South Africa movement, divestment struggle, and particularly the 1985 blockade. My comrades and friends here who participated in various ways and really inspired me in so many ways in those years and today. I want to thank Sam Roberts and IRAAS for hosting us. I want to thank Sam for his political and intellectual leadership of IRAAS. I was here in 1993 when the Institute was conceived and launched, and I know that our late colleague Manning Marable had a vision for IRAAS to be a site for liberatory thinking and organizing, and it is in the spirit of that liberatory project for Black life that Sam continues to lead IRAAS today. I also want to thank Sean Mendoza and Sharon Harris for helping to get us all here. So I'm delighted that IRAAS is hosting us for this. I also want to acknowledge the Center for Justice on campus, Kathy Bedeen and her colleagues who helped to publicize the event, and also to our student activist co-sponsors, the Columbia Divest community, as well as SAMI, the Students Against Mass Incarceration. And really it's the ongoing leadership and articulate, passionate commitment to justice of young people on this campus and beyond this campus and in the communities that we come from, that inspire us to continue the work that we are doing, and certainly to come back and talk about past struggles. I want to acknowledge Tony Glover. The slideshow that you saw earlier was put together by him, and you'll see a little bit more of it, which offers a wonderful chronicle of the 1980s struggle. So that's what I wanted to say by way of introduction. We're going to talk a little bit about the history, but we also want to talk about how the history connects to now. Many people think of Columbia and they think of 1968, and certainly that was an important landmark in the struggle on this campus. But in 1975, there was a divestment struggle, a Free South Africa struggle with fasting and shantytown and so forth. And in the 1980s, when I was here, along with all the people up here, you know, there was a re-intensification of that struggle, which in some ways culminated in the 1985 blockade. And as a historian, I always want to say, you know, there's a prelude and a postscript to the highlights and various struggles that we engage in, that we witness, that we learn about. And so we want to talk about the breadth of that struggle here today, and particularly to link it to that place on the planet that so inspired us at that time, the struggle that was on the ground in South Africa at that moment. You know, the chant and the demand and the platform Black Lives Matter has been in the forefront of our minds and our hearts recently, most recently with the murder of Walter Scott, but certainly going back to Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, Mike Brown, Tamir Rice, Rekia Boyd, and the struggle to free Marissa Alexander. All of these struggles remind us of the lessening value of Black life and the need for something like Black Lives Matter. In the 1980s, when we were involved in the Free South Africa movement, it was a different way of saying that Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter from Johannesburg to Harlem, from Cape Town to Chicago. And we really made a point of trying to link those struggles in a very important way, I think. There were community people involved. We had all kinds of international connections, including to the Palestinian struggle, to the Irish struggle, to the struggle in Central America. And we were very clear about the role of state violence, both there and here. And police murders, police harassment, police violence was very much connected to how we understood racial capitalism in this country, linked to what was going on in South Africa. And if we weren't clear about that, our comrades in the ANC were very astute at educating us and insisting that we be educated. So I just say those few words by way of introduction. And Tanaquil passed me a note saying I didn't introduce myself, and she always reminds me of various things that I forget to do. But I'm Barbara Ransby, and I was here as an undergraduate in the School of General Studies in the 1980s, and I'll say a little bit more by way of introduction in a few minutes. But I wanted to start, as opposed to starting up here, I wanted to also acknowledge other people in the audience who participated in the 1980s. Some of you were expecting me to invite you to introduce yourselves, and others perhaps not. But if we could just go through and just stand up and say your name and, you know, how you were connected or when you were connected very briefly, and then I'm going to ask my co-panelists to do the same before we begin, because they're, you know, we want to be inclusive. Vilna, why don't you start?
I was one of the people not expecting. Okay, my name is Vilna. Back then I was...
Whole name.
Back then I was Vilna Simmons. Now I'm Vilna Bashi-Treitler. And I got involved in the spring of '83, taking French with this strong woman who said, you have to come to our meetings, and I got involved, and I'm really glad to be back and see all my friends and partners and making the world a better place. So, thank you.
Thank you, Vilna. Row two.
Row two.
Hi, my name is Tony Glover, a little grayer, about 100 pounds heavier, but not fasting, right? I forgot how tiny these seats were.
They got smaller, Tony.
They got smaller,
They
okay.
did. It's not us.
I got involved a little before Vilna, I think the fall of '82, maybe it was the spring of 1983. It all happened by someone actually just handing me a flyer outside of St. Paul's Chapel. And it was a good start because I guess I became head of revolutionary communications for Free South Africa. And then it became part of the steering committee and co-chair.
And also concern Marcellus.
And also, later after, let's hear from 81 to 86, and from 85 to 86, there was an organization that got started, Concerned Black Students at Columbia, that dealt more broadly with the issue of racism. That was part of that.
My name is John Nesson. I first got involved in the whole divestment solidarity movement in 1977 when I was an undergraduate at Amherst College. That was just following the Soweto uprising in 1976 when U.S. banks topped up with redeemed billions of loans. After I graduated, I went on to be the student coordinator for the American Committee on Africa, which worked with students and other groups across the country. And we actually had called April 4th, students had as a national protest day involving civil disobedience. And I remember walking into one of the bars up here, meeting the steering committee members and letting them know of activities planned throughout the country. And I was there for another few weeks till Blockade, and was in touch with many people across the country. We were there at the right time, for the right reasons, right when the South African government was, not tolerant but cracking down harder. So I'm proud to be part of it, and Divestment Blockade definitely was an inspiration to many students across the country.
Thank you. Whitney?
Hello, Whitney Thomas, and I can't remember when I got involved. I think it was probably in 82 or 83. I was actually very involved in the Black Students Organization at Columbia at the time, on the executive committee as the vice president and eventually as the president, but became a member of the steering committee of the coalition. And continue, I guess Tony talked about concerned Black students at Columbia. Just things continued. There was continuous activity on campus. Even after we graduated, that was very, very involved and inspiring. So to all of my friends, it's really, really great to see everybody together. So, and to the faculty members, who
Amen.
were just so powerfully supportive. Just many thanks.
I'm Laura Flanders. I was then, I still am. I don't remember where this building was. So I don't remember how I got involved, except that I think Rob and I were involved in Students Against Militarism.
Right.
And then I got involved with Maria Novosa in chasing Jean Kirkpatrick off campus in 84. And I had just graduated in 85 when the divestment blockade took place, but I wasn't going to let that happen with that until I came on up. But at that point, I was doing a lot of journalism on Northern Ireland, and I spent a lot of time in Belfast, so the connection of issues globally was very clear.
Thank you. Nancy?
Nancy Krikorian. I had just come to Columbia to get an MFA in poetry in the School of the Arts in 1284, and then saw was going out on the steps and joined for 3 weeks. We were sleeping in shifts on the steps, and it was pretty cold.
Did you write any poetry while you were there?
No, but there was a lot of chanting. And I remember Laura and I and a couple other women had a little feminist cabal where we were complaining about some of the leadership behavior. I remember that too. Yeah, I think I blame you. But anyway, so and I've been working with Code Pink Women for Peace for the past 12 years, and I'm also very active in the Palestine Solidarity Movement, and feel often harken back to that time, with the kind of enthusiasm and passion and everything that was going on the campus around divestment for South Africa, and I feel some of that around Palestine work that's going on, now on this campus with the Students for Justice in Palestine and other groups.
Dave.
I'm Dave Goldner. I was also a member of the security committee. I'm not sure when I got involved or how or whatever. Thanks everybody for changing my focus in life and a lot of things I've done. Maybe with some of the inspiration, especially Tanaquil, Tony, or other people up here. I hope it wasn't me or anybody else who complained about it. Anyway, it's great to see the next generation. Yeah, that's really inspirational. Sorry, I also have my son, but he's not around. So anyway.
Okay, well, thank you. So we're going to start with self-introductions of the panel, because I want to, let people say what they want to say about themselves. I'm going to be a bit of a timekeeper, so people can take a minute or two and introduce themselves. And Laird, I'm looking at you because I was going to start there. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay.
Do you want me to do the microphone, or can people hear? Okay.
Yeah, the mic is for the video.
It's just for the
not-
video.
Yeah.
My name is Laird Townsend. I was on the steering committee at the time. I did come in around the same time, I think, as most everybody spoke in the audience around the spring of '83, or perhaps the winter. And I went along with there was a transition in leadership, and found myself on the steering committee and did some of the research and some of the writing and some of the in general engagement, and changed my life. As Dave mentioned, I saw what amazing things a group of people could do with the proper amount of free expression and respect and focus.
Mm-hmm. And just say what you've been doing. What do you do now?
I'm a journalist. I run a nonprofit that facilitates investigative journalism, investigative reporting. It's called Project Word. I was trained by the Associated Press as a reporter. I went on to be an editor at several environmental magazines. I specialize in human rights and environmental issues.
Yes, but remind me.
Yeah, just 1 to 2 minutes.
And am I supposed to fill the empty space here with anything else? Or maybe we could pass on.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're good. Okay. Nicely. Rob Jones came on again about the same time, came through the Black Students Organization, had been active in Students Against Militarism prior to that. And again, it was an amazing time, both for me, the actual blockade, but really the process that we came through as leaders, and the ability that we had to vehemently disagree with each other in private, figure things out, and yet present a really public and clear face in terms of what the message was. For me, also the connection to what was happening in South Africa at the time, and the leadership that we both got and respected from the ANC and SWAPO was paramount. And we were extraordinarily lucky because it was a time when the ANC had a lot of folk who were around. And so we had access and could have like late night conversations about what was happening on the ground and the difference between what was happening inside the country and out of the country. I then went on to work as Josh and Richard, who didn't stand up, for the American Committee on Africa. I was the projects director, and we did the folks might have known about Trans-Africa that did the sanctions at the national level. We did the state and local divestment work, and so across the country provided speakers and information to help what happened at Columbia at the student level happen at state houses and create pressure that eventually really made a difference in terms of A, bringing sanctions, and B, making a change in South Africa. Since then, I got a master's in psych. I do counseling with at-risk youth and families, and I do consulting work around race and dialogue. So,
My name is Daniel Armstrong, although everyone knows me as Danny.
Yes, we do.
I've not been called Danny since I was here on campus, but call me what you like.
Be Danny.
Yes, I know. I was the founding chairman of the coalition. I'll go more into that in our longer presentation, but since leaving Columbia, I spent a year in Zimbabwe, got my law degree and MBA from UCLA. In the late 90s, I was in the country of Ghana doing business projects. And in my free time, I'd coach basketball. And one day, I met two young men who dreamed of having a school but had no money. And I told them to go find a tree and start teaching. And they did that with a few students. It grew to 100. With that success, a businessman gave him a brand new building for a school. I came back home to LA and said, why are we so unhappy and shooting each other and fighting and dissatisfied with our lives? And I said, we're not living our dreams. So I wrote a book called How to Live Your Dreams, Find a Tree, and Get Started. And so what I do now is I help people realize their goals and dreams, and I work with students, gangsters, and corporate executives.
Thank you. I'm Barbara Ransby. I arrived on Columbia's campus in School of General Studies in 1980, and I had been an activist in Detroit before that. And I was thinking about there were several events that really shaped my activism in the 70s and 80s. One was Attica in 1971, prison uprising. The other was the overthrow of Allende in Chile, which our government participated in. And then it was the 67 Soweto uprising, which was front page news, and we really felt a sense of solidarity with young people in South Africa who were being massacred for participating in the anti-apartheid movement. And so I brought all that with me when I came to Columbia, and eventually co-chaired the Coalition for Free South Africa with Danny, got elected to the Faculty Student Senate, and presented a resolution in 1983 which immediately the university decided it was only advisory and it was not going to determine policy. So the fight to get the resolution passed then turned into the fight to have the university not only honor the divestment resolution, but recognize faculty governance, because we had won faculty over to support the resolution as well. So it was, it had been a unanimous resolution. I graduated the year before the blockade, so they actually flew me back. I think somebody raised money to fly me back for the blockade because people said, you have to be here. But it was also an interesting time in my life. I was pregnant with my first child, who's now 30, of course, at the end when we were trying to get the university to implement the divestment resolution. And so it was this moment of personal transformation, excitement, anticipation, and disappointment. But ultimately, the blockade, I think, was an enormous triumph of what people can do when they come together. After that, I'm a historian. I write about radical black women and radical movements. I wrote a book on Ella Baker and Eslanda Cardozo-Robeson, and then went on at University of Michigan to be involved in the Free South Africa movement, to be involved in the Black Radical Congress and other projects. And that's me in a nutshell.
I'm Marcellus Blount. It's so nice to see you. Some of you haven't seen in 30 years. You look the same.
Yeah, right.
And you're also beautiful.
Dream on.
I joined the faculty at Columbia in the fall of '85. So as Faulkner would say, I heard the echo, but not the shot, but it echoed loudly. I joined the English department, and I was the first full-time faculty member in the English department. Before I arrived, we tried to hire Mary Baraka. That didn't work, and so I arrived as Mary Baraka's replacement, I guess. I was 25 when I arrived, and I had not yet finished my education. And my experiences at Columbia with student activism really did underscore the extent to which I had lots to learn, and it was very helpful for me to have students as my teachers. I've stayed at Columbia my entire academic career. My job here at Columbia was my first full-time position, and I've been in the English department. I've now joined, in part, the Institute for Research in African American Studies, and student activism made the Institute possible. And so I want to underscore what my colleagues said about the debt of gratitude we owe to you.
Hi, buenas tardes, good afternoon. My name is Estela Vasquez. I'm a native of the Dominican Republic. I arrived to New York in 1965. As a teenager, I have taken part of an uprising in my country. Country was occupied by the U.S. Marines, 45,000 of them occupied the country for over a year. So I came to New York in '65, and my early contacts in the movement were, of course, the Panthers and the Young Lords. In the early '70s, I met a gentleman, a brother who's now deceased, Elombe Brath. And Elombe was my introduction to the South African struggle. And coming from Latin America, being in support of the Cuban Revolution, transferring my activism from what I have done as a teenager and what I have continued to do to the South African struggle was extremely easy. In the early 80s, I live in East Harlem. In the early 80s, we began a whole issue against gentrification in our neighborhood. We started seeing the early signs, and we took the position that abandoned, vacant, city-owned buildings were community property, and therefore we should take over those buildings. By the fact, I still live in a building that we occupied. We took over in 1982. And we ended up in a major fight with Mayor Koch. We were not able to acquire the building until David Dinkins got elected and sworn as a mayor. So when the students took over, and all we kept thinking is 1968, we as a community need to be there. And I helped organize my neighbors, my family. We make sure that we link Harlem with Spanish Harlem, with East Harlem, to make sure that we had a presence over here. My youngest child at the time was 5 years old, and Tanaquil finds it hysterical when she tracked me down the other day, and she asked me, "What is the little kid that used to come all the time doing?" And I say, "Tanaquil, I hope you're sitting down. She is a police officer." I have a friend, Juan Gonzalez, many of you, who was part of the occupation here in '68. Right. And Juan says that that's the only way that Tamara had to rebel against her parents, so she became part of the establishment. Since 30 years ago, and by the way, Tony, you do look the same. The only thing is now you have gray hairs like I do. Since then, I joined in 1986 the staff of 1199 SEIU, the Hospital Workers Union, and I have continued fighting for workers' rights, whether it's in South Africa, whether it's in defending the Cuban Revolution, or whether it's fighting against oppression, racism in this country. And Monday, our union will be taking part of a send-off to March for Justice, the Justice League, where young people will be marching from New York to Washington, D.C., to denounce what is happening along with the Black Lives Matter. In addition to that, on April 15th, Tax Day, we will be also demonstrating against the streets of New York, and there is a flyer right in the back. Thank you, Faith. There is a flyer right in the back where we'll be joining the 5 for 15 for our home care workers and for underpaid, overworked healthcare workers in nursing homes, and for the McDonald's, the fast food workers. And I ask all of you, as Amilcar Cabral said, the solidarity is not an act of charity, it's an act of defense of mutual interest. In '85, for us in East Harlem and in Harlem, coming to join the student was also defending our rights to stay in the communities where we live. And today, that fight still continues. A luta continua.
El pueblo unido
jamás será vencido. No business, no business, no business with South Africa.
Okay. Okay. My name is Tanaquil Jones, and I was at Columbia for quite a long time because I went to school on a part-time basis. I wasn't able to go on a full-time basis, and like Estela, the Young Lord Party and the Black Panther Party made an indelible impression on me as a young person. And also the way that they got their militancies and their radicalism was something that has stayed with me all my life. I consider myself to be a black radical feminist. After the coalition, I became one of the chairs along with, in the steering committee. Well, we didn't have chairs. I was part of the steering committee. And then subsequently, I became one of the chairs of Concerned Black Students at Columbia. And then after I left Columbia, I stayed involved with a number of organizations. One of the things that happened when I was at Columbia is somebody came up to me at one of our demonstrations and said, wow, you do work around political prisoners in South Africa. What about political prisoners in the United States? And so that got me thinking, wow, there are political prisoners in the United States. And so I did political prisoner work for almost 10 years, and I was involved with a number of very radical legal organizations, the Center for Constitutional Rights, the National Lawyers Guild. I was part of an organization called Black AIDS Mobilization, which was one of the first black, lesbian, gay organizations to do organizing work around AIDS with a woman named Kathy Cohen. Also, I was a part of work around reproductive freedom for women. And I am now a teacher in the New York City Department of Ed, and I'm also a union delegate of the UFT. We have very close alliances with unions, 1199 in particular, and District 65. And those were, so doing union work and supporting unions is something that is very close to my heart. So that's about it. I've also done a lot of work around tenant organizing, anti-police brutality work, and political repression.
Thanks. My name's Eric Hirsch. I was a professor here during the blockade, and I've been doing social justice work really since the early 1970s when I was an undergraduate. I kind of just missed the 60s, but was very influenced by the 60s, particularly the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, the student anti-war movement, and the women's movement. So I really see the work I've done since then as just a continuation of what I started to do then. When I was at the University of Chicago for graduate work, I got really involved in tenant organizing, the Hyde Park Tenants Union. I helped to found the Metropolitan Tenants Organization, which was the first metropolitan-wide tenants group in Chicago. And I'm very proud of the fact that we helped to elect Howard Washington, the first black mayor of Chicago.
That's right.
So I got to Columbia in 1982, and I did quite a bit of political work. I joined the Morningside Tenants Federation. So again, a lot of times universities like University of Chicago and Columbia try to control the rental market and give the best apartments to tenured professors and administrative staff. And they were literally evicting people who worked for them. So we created an eviction watch and tried to stop them from doing that. And I very rarely lose my temper, but I admit one time I really lost my temper when they were evicting someone. And if there hadn't been a door between me and the security person, well, I'm not sure what would have happened, but yeah, that's what would have happened. So a couple of other things before I just briefly talk about the blockade. I also worked with District 65 to organize a clerical union here on campus, which I presume is still in operation. And myself and Eric Foner helped to move all of the Columbia College classes off campus during the strike. So there were almost no classes taking place here because we found, you can only do this in New York City, we found places for all of the classes. One other thing I worked on, this was after the blockade and after the 1987 events. Someone came in my office and said, well, guess what? the university wants to take over the Audubon Ballroom
Right.
Yeah.
in order to set up a biotechnology research
Right.
center. And I thought it was a joke. I thought they were jerking my chain. They weren't. So we worked, and mainly with people in Harlem and some students, to prevent that from happening. And we were able to prevent it from happening for a while. I think they finally did it.
Yeah.
And the Audubon Ballroom was where Malcolm X made his last speeches, and it was also where he was assassinated. So with regard to the blockade itself, I was not really involved until the blockade started. And again, someone came in my office and said, "You're not going to believe what is happening." And I had just, I mean, to show you what a great social movement theorist I am, I had just spent the fall at Barnard telling students about the '68 events, and I had told them nothing like that is going to happen this year. So that turned out to be false. So once I found out about it, I tried to give as much support as I could and to
And you did.
stay out of the way as much as I could, because I'll say this is the best group of organizers I've ever worked with in my life. And I'm just proud to have been even a small part of what they did.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Good. So we want to begin a conversation, and I agreed to serve as moderator, so I'm going to sort of throw out some questions. We are, we'll go an hour, maybe we can go a little bit over because we got a late start, but we'll try to keep our answers tight. And I was going to invite Tony to, there is a slideshow that gives a nice chronology. Do you want to, could it go behind us without the sound?
Yeah, we can control.
Yeah. So I think that gives people a sense of the progression of things while we talk. But the first question I wanted to invite folks to address is the issue itself, because we can talk about what happened here at Columbia,
Right.
but that was a small part of the larger fight for a free South Africa, which the South African people were in the forefront of, but people all over the world connected to. And after he left Columbia, Rob spent a good chunk of time, as he mentioned, working with the American Committee on Africa. So, it was Free Mandela, it was Amandla Awetu, it was, those were the slogans. But can you say a little bit about the historical moment that impelled our activism?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I do that, I want to just say thank everything in the world for Estela and people like her. If you heard that spirit of radicalism and commitment, that's who we were surrounded by as students. We were great and we did great things, but we had amazing people from all around that were, part of making us as we were. The issue, and it's connected because we had
Folks from South Africa. We had David and Tabi and Daba and a number of people from Namibia who were part of SWAPO who helped us to really understand what democratic action looked like, right? So that this whole notion of people making their own decisions and being in leadership wasn't something that we made up, right? We were getting this from the liberation movements who were practicing it and trying to put it in place in terms of how they were going to shape their own futures. It was extraordinarily dynamic. For me personally, I saw a very, very strong connection between the civil rights movement here, right? The chance to try and break the chains of racism that had bound our folks for centuries, and what was happening in South Africa. And there were some interesting parallels, right? The fact that in South Africa folks were in the majority meant that they were going to win. Sooner or later, you knew that this was a struggle that had to succeed. And watching how they went about it and the struggle that was happening on the ground inside in terms of armed struggle and outside, in terms of more union organizing based and outside in terms of armed struggle, it was inspiring, right? And it for me, I'll speak for myself at the moment, it really made me want to redouble efforts and do everything that I could. I was really fortunate after the experience at Columbia and the blockade to get a chance to work for ACOA. I got to travel to South Africa pre-liberation, right? I was in South Africa in 86, 87, when the Caspers were rolling and folks were, literally still having meetings in churches and cops were coming in to break them up. I literally was running out the back door once while the cops, came in the front door. And the commitment that people had for their own liberation and for not taking shortcuts, right? For having the dialogue and having the discussion and thrashing it out was really just amazing. The whole question of human rights, right? What does this society look like after we win, right? Took up an awful lot of time and space, and so coming back to the blockade for a second. We did, in our own way, we did what we could to kind of, and I don't know how much of it was always exactly conscious, but we really tried to mirror that process, and so you wound up with a situation where, and I hope I'm the leadership piece that was upsetting. It was probably me. I'm sorry, but we were trying to both, at the one hand, be clear in terms of message, right? And that there were leaders, and that those leaders typically were of color, right? Because a lot of the work came out of the Black Student Organization and struggles that had been ongoing and connected from 68 and beyond. And yet also be of our time and our moment. So I'll shut up.
Okay. So does anybody else want to say about the anti-apartheid struggle itself before we get to the blockade? The Freedom Charter was an inspiration to us. The fact that Mandela was a political prisoner and other political prisoners, the role of the Black consciousness movement, Steve Biko had been assassinated. Does anybody else want to say a few words about the lay of the land, the politics that inspired us to do the work that we tried to do here? And then we'll move it to Columbia and talk a little bit about blockade. But I think there are young people in the audience who this is history, right? So, anybody want to say a couple of words about the questions that were circulated?
I would raise one the whole concept that there is this nation that African people were enslaved by the oppressed and repressed by the descendants of colonizers. Coming out of Latin America and our whole legacy, still 500 years later, of the effect of the so-called discovery of the Americas, meaning Columbus getting lost
in the continent, and the native people finding Columbus. It was something that was challenged everything that I believe. But I think one major example that was also it was the teachings of Elombe Brath, and I don't know how many of you in the room know Elombe or knew of Elombe, but he was one of our elders in Central Harlem that brought, understood that idea that the Pan-African movement needed to be, and that people of the diaspora needed to be participating. And then the decision of the Cuban government to send troops to defend Angola was an important element. It was like we were part of that. It was a part of Latin America that was there fighting. And what Rob raised, the whole question of the parallels with the history of the civil rights struggle. But for me, the issue is these people are not just marching. And this is not passive. This is taking guns in the hands and fighting with weapons was an inspiring element. Plus what was going here in the city with the 70s, the whole economic crisis in the city of New York, layoffs all over the place, and there had been also a number of, we see it now, of police cases. Michael Stewart's assassination was a conjunction of so many things. I don't know how many people remember Eleanor Bumpers getting shot in an evasion. And you talk about the tenant struggle here, right here, a few blocks from here, 113th Street, there was tenants organizing, and Columbia was able to succeed in getting laws passed, approved in the state of New York, that if you're a tenant, that your tenancy is linked to your job. Like you were working for Columbia, once you lost your job, you also lost the right to the apartment. And there was enormous fights around the city, around the question of tenants' right on that issue. But I think all of that serves as a backdrop of how do we link the oppression that we're feeling right here at home and link it with the work and the struggle across the Atlantic.
Okay, so, you know, I mean, it was a particular moment here and there, and as you can hear when people are talking, I mean, it was almost inseparable from the struggles that were going on right here. You know, there are moments when circumstances around a particular issue or a particular place on the planet become so acute, and we saw this as the last vestige of colonialism on the African continent, and it really inspired activism across the world. But I'm going to ask Danny to shift gears now and to begin to give people a little of the background before the blockade of the early 80s mobilizations on this campus around the issue of divestment in South Africa. So for a few minutes, kind of get us started on that chronology.
Thank you, Barbara. I'd like to begin by thanking Dr. Sam Roberts, Sean Mendoza, who I coordinate with as far as being here, and Barbara and all the coalition members and supporters for pulling this together. This is, for me, a milestone in my life, being here with you today. The coalition, whose original name was a Coalition for the Liberation of South Africa, I realized when I got the email in February that most people, even on the steering committee, don't know the initial early days and stages of what happened. And I am an organizer, like everyone here, and an organizer has to be organized. And I have every one of my annual calendars back to 1980. And I have kept all the flyers from the first event ever organized in Carmen Hall on February, I remember the date right now. And I've kept it all. In fact, I gave Sean a file with that documentation. I said, I'm going to die with this in some box in my back closet. I need to share this. And so what I did was, once I got the email, I said, I need to put, from my perspective, what I experienced to paper. And I wrote a small booklet. And it's called Free South Africa, the Columbia University Divestment Movement, A Personal Perspective, which outlines...
You wrote that since February?
Since February. I have worked my butt off. It was printed and done on Friday at 3 p.m.
There you go.
And so I've been scrambling, trust me. But I felt that it was important to tell this story of how it happened, because let me kind of briefly, I know time is short. For me, the coalition began in Compton, California, on a basketball court. I was passionate about basketball. And I read a book called Foul by Connie Hawkins. He said they play basketball 24 hours a day in New York City. So I determined as a sixth grader, I've got to get to New York City. And that brought me to Columbia. On that court in Compton, my sister was a student at Stanford. I was maybe 8th, 7th grade. She would, in between my shooting free throws, come out and lecture me about apartheid. And I'd be, yeah, right, whatever, let me shoot. And I realized, let me just let her talk. And she would lecture me about 30 minutes every time she came home about apartheid. And I was not that interested. But then, and I came to Columbia, and in the fall of '81, I saw a flyer about a film in Atchell Hall at Barnard. The film was October the 11th, 1981. David Ndaba spoke, and Josh Nesson, the man right there, spoke afterwards. And he said, Josh did, that Columbia had investments in South Africa and what the role of a divestment could do. And Josh invited students, audience members, to come to the law school. I have every date outlined here, every activity right here, and get the flyers for a demonstration taking place off campus. I learned later that Barack Obama was at that same film. So I met with Josh the next night and I got the flyers. And I realized something had to be done. And I began going to Low Library and began researching what happened in the 70s and learning more. Went down to the offices downtown and got information about divestment and apartheid. And I began reading. And the first event held in Carman Hall was in February. And we had a rap session with black and white South Africans. And about every 2 weeks, another event took place, another film, a speaker. And this was how, and even flyers were put up, no Facebook, no tweeting, nothing like that, on campus.
Hear that, kids? No Facebook, no tweeting. Pieces of paper that people had to read.
And I know you can't see from here, but these were all handmade. I have copies of handmade flyers, and the fancy ones my mother did. She's a calligraphist. I have all these still. Announcing what apartheid was, explain the deal, what apartheid was. And some of the highlights that first year, former Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm came and spoke about her experience in South Africa. The president of Italy was on campus, and he spoke out, encouraging Columbia to take a stand. On April 3rd, 1982, we planned the first rally. And it was scheduled for, I put the paperwork in March 15th, and a guy named Phil Benson, worked in Low Library, came to me and said, Danny, we have to change the date of the rally because that's Dean's Day, and alumni will be on campus. And we can't really have this rally taking place on Dean's Day. And I said, no, we have an agreement. I think that'll be a good day to have it on Dean's Day. So there's an article in Spectator, and ultimately they moved the rally behind Low Library, where the business school is now, on those steps. And it was a rally of 5 people. Myself, my cousin visiting from LA, and 3 other students in the rain. And that was our first rally. But it showed me that the university was concerned about this message of Columbia out of South Africa. In the fall of '82, coming back, the Coalition for Free South Africa was established and became a formal organization. And we had a scholarship campaign that first fall to raise money for a South African student. And that took place. Let me think any other highlights there.
Almost out of time.
Okay.
And we'll come back to you.
Yep. And Donald Woods, who wrote the book Biko, came and also spoke. And in conclusion here, the Woods event for me was important because I was an athlete first when I came to Columbia. And I would stay after practice a couple of hours working on my shot. But when Donald Woods came, I couldn't wait to leave practice because I'd get right over to change my clothes and get to the FBH for the event. And I realized then my priorities are changing because basketball was becoming less important and divestment was becoming my #1 issue.
Thank you, Dan. So we need more athletes like Danny Armstrong. Danny and I were kind of co-chairs of the Coalition for Free South Africa, and we were very different, short and tall, and, athletic and not athletic, and lots of other things. But we became good friends, and, I just want to add a couple of quick things to the early work before the blockade, and then I'm going to ask Tanaquil to talk a little bit about the chronology of the blockade. I think that laying the groundwork was really important, the teach-ins, the education, the vigils, and so forth. And then the period where we really tried to formally put the resolution before the university brought other people into the mix. Some people reluctantly, because when I think I mentioned before, when I agreed to run for the faculty student senate from general studies, and one of the first things I did was to work with groups on campus, and particularly one group that doesn't get mentioned a lot is the Caribbean Students Association. Students who had been involved in anti-colonial struggles where they came from, students from Jamaica and Trinidad, Guyana, etc. Packed the student faculty senate on the day that we had the resolution come forward, and really many people were taken by surprise. We got a unanimous vote that day. Later they said people were intimidated. They voted because there were so, it was like more black people than they ever saw in a room at Columbia, so they didn't want to stand up against it. But that set in motion a number of events where then the university had to answer to why it wasn't going to implement the resolution that the faculty senate had already agreed to. So strategically we used that. what happened then is the trustees decided not to act on the resolution, and the struggle then was to kind of expose that and to capitalize on that. And for a year, I was tied up in a committee, remember the implementation committee, agonized over it. Rob and Whitney and Tanaquil got millions of phone calls, from me. This is what they're trying to do now. So they came up with a compromise that I was the representative of the coalition on the committee, and I refused to sign that report. So the next year, my replacement was somebody deliberately not on the coalition committee, because they didn't want somebody who felt accountable beyond that particular committee, which I think is also testimony to a kind of undermining strategy that that they would adopt. But I also just want to underscore, even in the early period, not only were we looking to David Ndaba and Tabi Nyide and others, but also to people in the larger community, because there were all kinds of instances of racism all around us, and the push was always to make those connections. Just want to say, too, mentioning Tabi and David Ndaba, who became lifelong friends, I went to South Africa years ago with my children and so forth, and we saw Tabi and David Ndaba, who left South Africa after the Soweto uprising, he became a medical doctor. We stayed in touch, and he reclaimed his name. His name was actually Sam Galube, and we all knew him as David Ndaba. But when he had escaped South Africa, worked with Umkhonto we Sizwe, which was the military wing of the ANC and so forth, he had to change his name. And when he went back, he reclaimed the name that he had before he left, and that was Sam Galube. So it was interesting to kind of see him go full circle in terms of returning to South Africa. And many people there now, of course, are continuing the struggle there, because far from being a panacea and a finite point of freedom, a Luta Continua in South Africa as well as here to this day. So I think I will stop there and ask, what?
Why don't we go to Rob, because I'm going to be doing Concerned Black Students afterwards.
Well, we can go to anyone who wants to pick up and begin to talk after 83, after 84, the sort of prelude to the blockade. I thought Tanaquil was going to do that. Danny wants to add a quick point.
Can I have a minute? I want to be the transition between when I was organizing, we were here, to the blockade. May I be that transition a little bit there, if you don't mind? Okay, thank you. Quickly, I had gotten accustomed to people coming and going. They may be with the divestment campaign for a week, a month, but then they left. It just was a turnover constantly until the steering committee and Barbara came and everything. Then we began a nucleus who stayed. But I was accustomed to people coming and going. Barbara, I remember meeting Barbara in '83, and she presented the concept of the resolution. And I say this about Barbara in here. At rallies, it's free. Barbara had a way of speaking without great emotion, but with great conviction. As she presented the facts of our case, she was like our lawyer. When Barbara joined the coalition, it was like an adult was in the room.
And it still is.
Yeah, she still is. She still is. But I want to get to the, 1 second.
It's okay.
Once I had it, let me find it now. I'm sorry, I had it 1 second.
I threw you off, I'm sorry.
It's that adult presence that does it every time.
Yes. Okay, now, there was a debate at the end between a freeze and divestment. I advocated for a freeze. I'll tell you why. I had seen people come and go all the time. I was leaving, Barbara was leaving. And I knew what it took to put flyers on this campus, every dorm, every floor. I failed to grasp the depth and breadth of student support for divestment in one coalition meeting, as we debated to agree to a freeze or stand firm on total divestment. I recall a new student supporter, whom I did not recognize, gleefully express his excitement for the issue of divestment and saying how committed he was to going all out next year organizing. I could only think, I've heard that before, and what happens when midterms hit or papers due? The revolving door was in my mind. To continue to demand divestment would require a committed group who are willing to sacrifice. I did not see it. I misjudged. Barbara was correct in holding out for divestment. Students were committed and willing to sacrifice and organize. Holding out for divestment was the principled stance. Sometimes you just have to have faith. Barbara had it. And that led us to the next year.
Thank you.
There you go.
So Rob, Tanaquil has deflected to you to take us to that next year, that intense year that build up to the blockade. Do you want to begin to give some of that history? Sorry? They're a disagreeable lot here.
How about if we'll tag team?
One of my things was that I was going to talk subsequently about the concerned black students. But I guess one of the things that was different, you know, of course, after Barbara left, and it was the fall of 1985, we made some changes in leadership. For example, we decided we didn't want to have a chair and a co-chair. We wanted to have a more democratic, egalitarian, gender-sensitive leadership composition. So unlike the panel that's up here now, it was fairly equally divided amongst men and women in the steering committee. So that was one thing. We also made a decision, which wasn't changed from the past, that we felt it was extremely important that the steering committee be majority people of color. Because people of color were the ones that were being affected in South Africa, and that leadership of a movement that affected black people in South Africa should be led by black people and people of color here. So that was another decision that we made. Danny just spoke of how it was organizing in the 80s when we didn't have Twitter, and we didn't have social media, and when you just had to do the hard work of phone trees. We had to break up numbers and divide up hundreds of numbers amongst ourselves, and everybody had 10 numbers that they had to call. That was one thing. And I'm not putting down activists today. I'm just saying that it was a different way of organizing. We had to make flyers and find ways of reproducing those flyers when we didn't have a budget. And how were we going to get the money? So we used to take up collections in our meetings, and the students and the BSO also. And also we had, later on, we were able to get a lot of support from actually District 65 workers who helped us in a number of ways, because they were the clerical workers and they had access to the copying machines and all of that. And by the way, I didn't mention, but we also had tremendous support from the security personnel on the campus who assisted us in a number of ways. So that was and we're in solidarity with what we were doing. So in the fall, we continued to have meetings as they had in the past. And we were basically building up to the spring. And then in March, we decided to, sort of play on words, have divest fast, right? So we wanted them to divest fast, and we were also going to be on a fast. So we started that, and then it led up, as you saw here in this wonderful slideshow that Tony Glover put together, who was also our, like he stated earlier, our revolution. I wish I had some of the flyers here, which I don't, that Tony put together. But he was the main person, along with Vilna, Simmons, now Bashi, making our flyers. And we would just go out and we would distribute them on campus. And we had a number of events. And then on April 4th, we made a decision. We came together and we talked for quite a long time about whether or not we should chain the doors of Hamilton Hall. And it was really heated, and people were talking earlier about us weighing the pros and cons. What were we willing to sacrifice for our belief? And we also realized that some people, we could possibly be expelled. We could possibly be arrested, and we had to say that there were, was that something that we were willing to do? So we discussed it what we wanted to do, and we made a decision that we were going to chain the doors. And we sort of started out with a demonstration because I believe April 4th was National Divestment Day. So all around the country, as Josh Nesson had said, everybody was involved in these actions. And so we started off at the Sundial, and we started marching and chanting, and we went through to Hamilton Hall, and then some of us, of course, were underground in the tunnels. And while people were as a diversion on the front, we went through the tunnels and chained the doors from behind, and the rest is kind of history.
So it's on that day, it seemed like it was, you know, another protest, as there had been many protests, and then all of a sudden, it became,
oh, I forgot to move it too.
That's fine.
Isn't this one?
It turned into something really, really different, because as we got to Hamilton Hall, we said, well, guess what, this is now Mandela Hall, and we've taken the building, and we're gonna be here. Sorry.
Go ahead. I just wanted to add something at some point.
Okay, do you want to do it now?
Okay, sure. I mean, I guess one thing that I wanted to emphasize in response to what Tanaquil was saying was that there was a lot of planning around the blockade.
Yes.
It wasn't like we just decided on one day we're going to do this. There were weeks of discussions about how it would happen. Then we broke for spring break. I'm sure people had conversations with their relatives about how, okay, I might be arrested in a couple of weeks. I might get kicked out of school. This is about to happen. So there was a lot of planning that went into it. There were people in the tunnels directing traffic while the people on the outside were chaining the doors shut. And we had contacted legal counsel. Yes. We had contacted, I mean, this was a big event that was planned. So it wasn't, I just wanted to
underscore that.
Amplify the degree of planning that went into that day, because you know, like the folks who were chaining the doors were changing their clothes so they could blend into the crowd. The folks on the inside were passing out flyers telling people where they could go so that there wouldn't be an accusation that we were creating a fire hazard. We contacted Lennox Hines, Haywood Burns, all these folks anticipating that we were going to get locked up that day. So that's how that day was built. I mean, it was a culmination of months of planning. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Whitney.
Yeah, it was a good addition. Okay, well, did you finish your thought and then Laird say something?
So the end of the thought is, with all of that planning, it's now Mandela Hall, and I think this is probably where you're going to go, so I won't. Right? We figured that, you know, university has police and they've got security, and we'd be there for a few hours, and the next thing you know, we would have made a statement and escalated and taken a building, and life would have been, but that they would have come and taken us and carted us off pretty quickly. Didn't happen that way. When you think strategy and tactics, the notion that they would have left us there in hindsight just makes absolutely no sense. But they were, this whole piece in terms of being concerned about how many black people there were and this and that. I don't know what went into their decision-making process. It would be interesting to have a conversation with somebody in the administration. I remember there was one security officer whose name was Smart, and we would just say Mr. Smart wasn't particularly smart because he left us, and sure, yeah, and that's all. But I guess at the end, that's all it took, right? Mm-hmm. Leaving us be for about 12 hours was all it took, and the next thing you know, there were people, and there were more people, and the next, and then it would have been a much more difficult thing to move us. So,
I think Laird and then Eric.
Just briefly, I mean, on that, hindsight, we don't know. I mean, if they had tried to crack down in the way that we expected, it could have been even worse. It could have been the same outcome, because there might have been an even huger and more protracted rally to our defense. It's hard to, but I just wanted to go back to, address the period that Barbara and Daniel, I can say it, were alluding to in terms of the transition, because this was, I think it's important. It's obviously the blockade is important, and all the organizing and the preparation, as Whitney said, that's certainly the most dramatic focus and worthy of our attention. But I will say that the university, during the period in which they were referring to this compromise, this potential freeze versus divestment, and this sign-off of this committee. The university was giving us a chance to succeed on their terms. And, I think this was a really, really important point that Barbara alluded to, but I just want to amplify that we decided to fail according to those terms. We decided to reject the terms that would have been on paper a valuable advancement according to the university and all the disinterested parties, which we did not accept. And I think I couldn't emphasize this enough, that we had, at this point, believed that we had two Black South African students, Denise Beloy and Jose de Souza, and the decision, whether they had emerged or not, the decision that we had to make was a compromise versus holding out, and you get nothing when you hold out. The only thing you get is some kind of, I don't know, maybe someone else can describe it better, but there's this sense that it's not enough, and we'd rather have the righteous fuel to go all the way with what we wanted to do than to point to some small advance. And I only mention that because I think that drove a lot of our activity leading up to the blockade.
Wait, I'm going to shift, actually, I'm reminded that we also promised some interaction, so we want to have audience questions. But I want to actually give Marcellus and Eric and then Estela a chance to talk from the point of view of faculty who made a decision to be involved, and then community folks who made a decision to be involved. And your convention was perfect Whitney, to underscore the planning that went into it. So let's do that, and then we will shift to the audience to give people a chance who were active and also people who want to ask questions.
IRAAS, and as a faculty member, as a young faculty member, I actually didn't know what my responsibilities were. So I'm still, as a faculty member, in the process of becoming, and I didn't understand that I actually had options to do nothing. Right? I didn't realize that I wasn't socialized. I had not been fully socialized, that's right, to be an activist. So what I found was thinking about what was my particular role as a faculty member. And more often than not, that was to be a spectator. But in the midst of the kind of social change that students were attempting to effect, it wasn't sufficient for me simply to watch what was happening. I had to participate. And people said, well, Marcellus, you're going to get fired. And this is very important to me that I say, well, then they will simply have to fire me, because my job as a faculty member is to support the students, even at risk of what the consequences will be for me. And I want to go back just briefly to this notion. I want to go back briefly to this notion that I was being educated by my students. A sense of belatedness at my age of not having been involved in what we define narrowly as the civil rights movement. And I came to understand that that movement was global, but its locus at Columbia meant that we had to think about a range of kinds of issues. And it connected for me in terms of what we needed in terms of a Black Studies program and the ways in which these larger social movements were intimately tied to what we did in the classroom. And Columbia needed to understand that we were going to change the classroom. And I was a small part of that, and that was very important to me.
So one very brief comment I want to make about why Michael Softman was president at the time did not arrest people. He had actually been law school dean in 1968 when President Gray brought in the police, and there was a police riot with policemen, riding the horses on the quad and beating students and going up into dormitories and beating students in their dorm rooms. So, and as a result of that, the president was fired. So I do think that might have restrained Michael Sovereign.
1968.
Stand on the
Before it's
shoulders.
too late. That's what we said, apart from the send-off.
So in terms of the faculty role in these kinds of things, generally I would just don't expect much, because faculty are pretty much impossible to organize.
Kind of looking at it, right?
They're never going to initiate anything themselves. So do what you think you need to do, and then the faculty, like me and Marcellus, we will be with you. But I wouldn't start anything like this with the faculty.
But I think to say, expect more of the faculty. I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, you see the sense of possibility when folks do make a break. So I wanted to invite Estela, and then we're going to invite questions and comments from the audience.
So please, what I would like to bring is some of the backdrop that preceded the blockade. The 1984 campaign of Jesse Jackson for president electrified, engaged a number of people in to show what was the possibility. And for those of us that were part of that campaign, we still remember what it was like. In East Harlem, we organized November of '83, a Latino breakfast for Jesse Jackson. We expected 50 people. We gave them bread and coffee, Puerto Rican breakfast, and 300 people showed up. And so I think that that backdrop of what the campaign of Jackson, the possibilities that it raised. And I don't think we can underscore, if not all of labor, at least it's one union that needs to be mentioned, is District Council 65. Cleveland Robinson, who was then Secretary Treasurer of District 65, was one of the New York City organizers of the March on Washington in 1963. Jim Bell, remember Jim? Jim Bell was also an incredible labor organizer who put every effort on the union in support. And there is one other person that I would like to mention is Bill Lynch, who, I forgot which union Bill was working at that point, but there were people both in 1189, there were people in the Teamsters, there were people in 1707 that have all been part of the civil rights movement that saw this as a continuation of the struggle. And then on the international level, was the triumph of the Sandinistas in Nicaragua in '79, was the ongoing civil war that was taking place in El Salvador. And here in New York, there was union activists that may not have been the leadership of their union. My husband was a member of the newspaper guild. He was a typesetter of all places, People magazine. And although his leadership was not engaged in supporting this, he was agitating and advocating. And then the tenants movement, we had a committee in East Harlem, the committee to save East Harlem. And in the Lower East Side, there was the homesteaders movement in the Lower East Side that had taken over a number of buildings. So all those elements came in, and I think collectively, a lot of us remember 1968. And what we remember of '68 is the abuse and the brutal suppression of the students. And there were people from that leadership still connected, especially in the Latino community, like Juan Gonzalez, to many of us. So we saw this we cannot allow, it was Amiri Barak, and I mentioned him before, Lombe, and there was a lot of other activists in Harlem that say this is part of our fight, and this is part of our struggle, and what happens in Colombia is happening to our children. And I remember that the kids that we used to bring, Roberto Marrero, who's now in Puerto Rico, had a 3-year-old, I had a 5-year-old, And to our kids, our kids, when they used to say, we want to go and sleep with the kids at Columbia. They saw Tanaquil and Charlie and all of you as the big kids, and they saw this as a camp. This was summer camp for our kids. But that confluence of prior experience on a number of movements, and people like the leadership of Cleveland Brothers who put resources on his youth, like in here, to make sure that happens.
Can I just add two things? Thank you for bringing in all those individuals, but also I remember specifically like going out to Harlem with Tony, with leaflets, and going to all the churches in Harlem. And when Jesse Jackson came to the blockade, we literally, one of the fears was, we kept talking about how Columbia is located in Harlem. It is not located in Morningside Heights. And we kept making that connection and going back and talking about the whole struggle that historically had existed, where Columbia wanted to see itself separate and apart, this elitist institution that didn't want people from the community having access. And there was that fight around the gym in Morningside Park. And so one of the things, when thousands of black people from the community, because they brought us food, people would bring us food, blankets, when they came and marched onto that campus, Columbia was really blown away by the amount of support. And we got a lot of media attention as well. And then there were events going on in South Africa, whether it was the Crossroads. People were constantly being killed and murdered there.
I think in March 1985, the day before we started the fast, right, it was the Crossroads Massacre, which happened almost on the anniversary of the Sharpsville Massacre. So.
Right, and then there were the Sun City artists, and there were all these things that were going on. And Laura also mentioned about the struggle in Ireland. And I remember I had a T-shirt that I wore for years, and it was about, again, strip searching of Irish women who were being, the whole struggle that was going on in Ireland. And we had this guy that came, I don't know if you remember him, Kilpatrick, and he used to sing, and he was very much involved in the support of the Irish Republican movement. So there were a lot of things going on all around the world that we connected to. And I just think that it's important that, we didn't operate in a vacuum, we didn't operate in isolation, and we were really about making connections to the community and making the community feel welcome on campus.
One footnote to the international, and then I do want to shift to audience questions because we need a break between the panels, but Omar Garzuti, who has been the person who has been at the forefront of BDS, who through the Feminists of Color delegation that I went on to Palestine and developing a relationship with Omar, he said, I was at Columbia at that time, and the divestment struggle was such an inspiration to me. He says, and there was this beautiful woman who was so brave, she was our leader. What was her name? And it was, of course, Tanaquil. He didn't emphasize the beautiful as much as the other things, but the beautiful category. But just the links, those international links, I think, were really important.
Before we shift, let me just one thing real quick. All of these things, absolutely linkages, etc. But one of the things that we were really aware of was that we were at Columbia, and that gave us a platform, and it gave us a megaphone to broadcast in a way that people would come and they would cover and they would support us in ways that they might not support at Rutgers, which was also a struggle, and other universities which were also a struggle. So we were really aware of the opportunity that we had and the responsibility and privilege that we had to be able to make a difference at every step of the way. So.
Okay, comments and questions from the audience. You all have been so patient. So, yeah. Right here.
Megaphone, it's just for the video, you won't hear it.
Okay, good. Well, as a member of the Council of Elders, very few of us here, we're entitled to a half an hour. Well, I'm glad the young folks are here because this is an experience that they need to know about. Someone mentioned over there a moment ago about the role of the Caribbean students. And it fills my heart with joy. And not only the Caribbean students, but us as regular folks from the Caribbean, we were very much involved with the movement. I know as a member of Local 1199, Leon Davis, Doris Turner, etc., we voted overwhelmingly to divest our funds from South Africa. And we took so many trips to Albany and to Washington that I was about to begin to believe that I was a politician. But we succeeded. I have a problem, though, that today we are sitting back and some of us are patting each other on the back and for a job well done and so on and so forth. But maybe in my dotish days here, I'm missing something. As far as I'm concerned, apartheid is alive and well in South Africa. Anytime you try to tell a people that a system is over, it is dead, it is finished, and the things that you fought against, the land to be returned to its rightful owner, every institution of apartheid is intact in South Africa. There are folks coming out of South Africa making all kind of money. You have folks that are becoming millionaires and multi-millionaires off the backs of the struggling, the destitute people who fought and they bear the brunt of the pain and the suffering of apartheid. And today, we're not discussing those things. We're not discussing who are the rightful owners of South Africa. Not the apartheid system, the European settlers that is alive and well in South Africa. The battle is far from over. That is why I'm happy to see these young people here. Because you must be made to understand the struggle that us, the old-timers, put up for you. And you have to take this revolution to its conclusion. It is far from over. Just as how many want to tell us the revolution in Haiti and what those ancestors did in creating this great revolution. Yes, there was a revolution, but it was not complete. It is up to us, you, the young folks now, to take the baton and to complete a revolution. And you cannot intellectualize and romanticize what went down. That was evil. Evil in South Africa, and evil, the apartheid system of the United States. So we are still fighting this struggle. So I would like to close. I would like to close though by reading you something here that Mr. Garvey, the Honorable Marcus Garvey, gave to us. I'm a quick reader. We are in an institution of learning. And many of us don't really understand what an education is all about. We believe that the degrees and all these things are what an education is all about. But Mr. Garvey says, in 1922, he was talking to us, our people. Mr. Garvey said, an education is the medium by which a people are prepared for the creation of their own particular civilization and the advancement and glory of their own race. He goes on to say that you must never stop learning, because the world's greatest men and women were people who educated themselves outside of the university with all the knowledge that the university gives. He said one must never stop reading. Read history incessantly until you master it. This means your own national history, the history of the world, social history, industrial history, and the history of the different sciences, but primarily the history of man. Because if you do not know what went on before you came and what is happening at the time you live, but away from you, you will not know the world and will be ignorant of the world and mankind. He said you can only make the best out of life by knowing...
It's a great quote, most of it, and I'm going to stop you there because we want to give the young people here a chance to... I agree with you, the fight is far from over in South Africa. There's some new developments that are hopeful. The economic freedom fighters are split in COSATU, the challenge of the old guard ANC, which are also new black millionaires. So I agree with you.
I thought really this thing here today was about the interaction of us.
You know what, my brother, there's a bunch of people here who want to interact, and I appreciate.
Thank you for allowing the elder to.
Thank you. Yeah, Luta Continua was to make that very point. The struggle continues. Asha?
So my question is, sorry? Oh, my question is, were there moments where you all in the organizing made strategic compromises? And I'm interested to hear, if so, what were they? And then also, were there moments in the strategizing where y'all made decisions you regretted?
One quick step. The first question. Very briefly. I don't know what anyone else, but speaking for myself, I thought that the decision to end the blockade was a strategic compromise. I think we thought it through. We could have stayed out there for a long time. We felt that the point had been made. And while there was some dissent, some people wanted to stay because we said we would be there until they divested. We pulled back because that was part of the fight. To pull back and then wait to see what happens and then do the next step.
Anyone else on that question?
Well, I'd just like to say that that turned out to be very effective because the organizing continued throughout the summer. And then the administration decided to divest, although whether it was complete divestment is another question, but they said we're divesting just before the next semester started in the fall. And I feel, having been a part of that Columbia would have been shut down completely that fall if they hadn't made that decision to divest. So I think it was the right strategic decision.
I think also there were compromises because in organizing the blockade, there was a very insular group of about 10 people who were part of the steering committee. And as we said, we didn't think we'd be there for a long time. So, but when we were there, and there were about 300 people there, our world expanded. And it included students who necessarily did not take into the consideration that we did about whether we would get expelled, whether we'd be suspended. So we had to broaden our own perspective. For example, one of the things we did was ask for amnesty for the students there. It's not something that we thought about before the blockade, but as the blockade occurred and other people got involved, there were broader concerns that we had. So we had to broaden our perspective in terms of this. I mean, we didn't think it was about us, but it wasn't just about the steering committee or the 40 people who were members of the coalition. It was more about everyone who had committed at that point. So there were processes like that going on a lot, actually, during the blockade.
Okay, we're going to take a few more in sequence. We'll take a few more comments and or questions from the audience, and we'll give anyone, each person up here doesn't have to say a closing remark, but if anyone has a closing remark, because the next panel actually will bring young activists up here after a short break. So Vilna, Josh, and
I don't know if memory serves. I'm not sure how well my memory is serving me at this point, but I think I have an answer to both the questions posed. I think one of the things we did strategically was to organize the graduation ceremony where we were going to walk out. We wanted to give the message that just because the blockade is over does not mean we're dropping this issue. So we organized an entire alternative divestment ceremony.
Complete with diplomas, with the Freedom Charter of South Africa.
Oh, it was awesome. And we timed it so that the people graduating would walk out as soon as the president stood up to make his speech, which incensed some people, but others were really proud. And if I had any regrets, it's because I felt like I was leaving some of my friends behind by participating in this graduation ceremony, and it was really, really hard to do because I really didn't want to move on and leave people hanging. And I felt like those who hadn't graduated and couldn't participate in that were kind of left more vulnerable than those of us who could participate in that ceremony. And that was a really difficult moment.
Yes, it wasn't accidental that April 4th was the day that the blockade began. It was the culmination of 2 weeks of action around the country from March 21st, the anniversary of the Sharpeville massacre in South Africa, to April 4th, the day Martin Luther King was assassinated. So the blockade was not just about divestment, but against racism in this country. And I agree with Tanaquil. For me, the most powerful moment of the 3 weeks was when, hundreds of people marched on campus from Harlem and other communities. And I looked at the crowd and I thought, if we stay together, we can accomplish anything. And of course, the student movement didn't end in 1985. 1986, there was a whole proliferation of students building shanties to represent the conditions of black South Africans. We even built a shanty in front of Citibank at lunchtime to block people from coming in or out. I don't think it's an accident that they then closed their offices. But there's a lot more that has to be done in South Africa, and we see here the racism, all the gains of the civil rights movement being attacked, the Voting Rights Act just about repealed by the Supreme Court, and what's the Obama administration doing to address that? There were plenty of opportunities. There's a bill in Congress to put back key sections of the Voting Rights Act, yet not a word of it was mentioned in the Selma Montgomery commemorations. So there's a lot to be done, and certainly that blockade was historic. I know firsthand it sparked students in Berkeley, and the struggle continued for many other years on the campuses.
Thank you. Let's take it to Randolph, and then Whitney, and then Daniel.
Hello. Okay. I guess where I want to start first is thank you for everyone here. It's important for me to be here, it's important for me to be here to hear the histories and the stories being shared of different people in the student movement at that time, be it faculty or people who were involved from the community side, just to get a sense of the presence of that time period. So thank you, and thank you especially Professor Ransby for moderating this panel. I guess my question is, I feel sort of underexposed to the sort of politics of that time period, like the 80s, just in general. I know something was mentioned of the Latinos for was it Jesse Jackson campaign in 84, and I get that sense of that going on there. But a lot of this talk is framed around the campaign and divest as a strategic decision, right? So I want to know, what is it that positioned divestment on campus as a tactic or a political conversation worth having, and how was that conversation pitted against stuff going on domestically on campus? So why did students choose to emphasize divestment as a tactic, right? I don't know if that was concise, and I'm still trying to formulate it, but there it is.
We're going to take, we have that question, and you're going to answer it when we get to your turn, and then we're going to take the other comments or questions, and then we'll have people here respond. And kind of Whitney was, you sure? Yeah. Put it on tape.
You want it?
Whitney and then Dan.
Thanks. I have to preface this by saying that it feels a little bit irrelevant given sort of the stature of the issues at hand, the discussion about different movements, global movements, national movements, et cetera. But I do have a personal question to the members of the panel. And it's based in this observation. each of us must decide periodically in whatever environments we find ourselves how we will be agents of change, if we will take these positions that are unpopular, that are lonely, and I just kind of had this recollection of Danny standing alone out there on the steps, just day after day, out there with the megaphone, with Gil Scott-Heron playing before anybody was listening, all right? And Barbara, you'd be out there by yourself a lot too. Okay, so this is a question that I'm putting out there for the panel, but also for each of us to explore, maybe even after we leave here today. And the question is, what are the factors that we have to, I guess, create for ourselves, or how do we derive the strength to be that person? Something magical happens when there are 3 people in a crowd, but when there are 1 or 2, there is really no magic other than the magic that you feel or the commitment that you feel yourself. So I'm just asking, how did you do that? And I'm just throwing it out there. I mean, it was a very particular time in this movement that we're discussing where people were coming and going. And I remember, Danny, you were the guy who was out there with a megaphone and Gil Scott-Heron playing. How do we summon the strength to be that person? Is the question. And Barbara, I know that you've been in that position many times, and I'm assuming that others on the panel have been in that position. And what is it that you draw on? So, I mean, I have my own set of answers, but I think it's important for people to think about that so that they can create that for themselves as they live.
Yeah, I want to echo Randall's point and just say thank you, everyone, for this opportunity to come and learn from all of the work that you've done and continue to do. And so my question is really a question about sustainability, because a lot of times when we think of student activism, right, we think of students as very transient. We think is that a kind of a moment in people's lives when there's a lot of exploration, there's a lot of opportunity, and there's lots of energy, right? But I noticed that most of you, I think all of you graduated, right? You were still students, and you continue to be students, and you completed. But then most of you are still doing very radical work. You've found a way to make your activism sustainable throughout, your life in the long term. So, my question is a little bit maybe asking about more mundane things. Is how did you continue to be students during this time? How did you get things done? What was the relationship between your work, and then how did you turn that energy into kind of something sustainable that could, you could lead lives of justice for a much longer period than... Yes, different questions.
How did we not fail out forever?
Right.
And how did we wind up creating lives that matter, right?
Okay, is that good? Is there any other pressing? Okay, so does everybody else get back? Where? Oh, okay.
Hi, I was just wondering if you ever considered anything more militant or violent than locking the doors. Did that ever come up? Because you've mentioned the '68 struggles and the police violence, and I'm just wondering if you considered that or if that was never on the table.
So we have 4 questions on the table. I didn't want to lose the comment that the brother made about South Africa today, and I think it's always a question of what is winning, right? That there is a way in which we visit a moment where there was, I think, some strategic victory, but limited victory, and as the arch of the struggle plays out, we find ourselves in a situation where people who have been in the mine workers union are now, calling for the, overseeing the shooting down of striking miners, as was the case a little over a year ago. So I don't want to lose track of that question. Why divestment as a tactic was the other question. Whitney's eloquent question about personal commitment and being the only one sometimes. Dan's question about sustainability, and this final question about militancy. So anyone can start. Everyone doesn't have to speak. I might defer because I'm going to be a part of the second panel also. Marcellus?
I wonder if I could get us going. That question about what it was that enabled us, sometimes even when we were alone, to persist, I think is an important one. And for me, it was a sense of that I was on the right side of history, that what I was doing really mattered, and that as a result, that there was a kind of moral authority that was always my companion, that I was doing the right thing, that it would have costs, but that I was doing the right thing. And that sustained me then, and in terms of my own personal activism, it sustains me today, whether we're talking about race or issues related to class, or I'm glad we heard a moment of a kind of feminist critique when there are issues related to gender, issues related to sexual orientation. It matters to me when I know I'm on the right side of issues.
I celebrated about a week ago or so my 67th birthday. And I still feel today the same unshaken commitment, belief that I felt at the age of 14, 15 in the Dominican Republic, that there is another world is possible, that if you believe in something, doesn't matter the obstacles that you encounter, that you have to find other people that have the same belief. And I know it may sound corny, but it's kind of what people that have a religion, that have that, that faith. If you're a Christian, that there is an afterworld and there is a Savior. And I think that my belief is, I don't believe that there is a Savior afterwards, but I think that the capacity to change society, that we are the saviors, that we can be the shakers and the makers of our own future. And that if we are not achieving it now, planting the seed for the next generation, I think the thing that excites me the most is when I see my grandchildren now taking part in activities about climate change. I feel it's part of the same struggle. So I think it's not a religious, but that conviction that you can struggle and that without struggle, there is no progress, as a great abolitionist said over 150 years ago in this country. So the question of that the struggle continue, a luta continua, is not something that when you achieve one break point, like getting Mandela out of jail, that's where it stopped. Because I don't know about the rest of you, but brother, thank you for raising it. When I saw miners getting shot in South Africa, I felt pain. I felt pain because to me was, my God, I remember Soweto, I remember Biko, Sharpeville. How can now the guns be turned against our own people?
We have about 5 more minutes for select comments. Dan.
I'll respond to Whitney and Daniel's point as best I can. I look at for myself passion, purpose, and the universe. Meaning, what are you passionate about? And defining your purpose. And if that's the case, watch how the universe unfolds and put things into order. Because I believe, looking back all these years now, from 81 to today, the universe brought us together. I was strategically placed during the blockade. I had left New York and went to Zimbabwe in October. In March, I decided to go to South Africa to see for myself apartheid. I was in a colored section of town called Carnationville, and I woke up, heard on the radio, students at Columbia taking over a building, details at noon. I ran and get the morning paper, the Rand Daily Mail. It's on the front page. May I see that? I'm gonna show you this. I got the Sowetoan, and that's the Sowetoan right there, announcing that Columbia students have taken over a building. And so I called Spectator Collect.
Collect.
For young people, collect is when you don't pay for the call, they pay for the call. I said, I'm in South Africa right now. You all know that's being reported all over the country? They said no. They told me that President Sovereign had said that Bishop Tutu would be against the students and divestment and the blockade. I said, that's interesting, because I'm meeting Bishop Tutu in about 4 hours. The universe put that together. This picture here is Bishop Tutu and I doing the blockade. And we talked about what was going on. He said, no, I'm with the students. I'm doing a radio interview to New York this afternoon. I'm gonna let that message be told. I'm 30 years late, coalition members, but when I told people in South Africa what was going on, they said, tell them that's helpful and tell them we thank them. I'm 30 years late, I'm sorry. The point is, to Daniel's point, how do you sustain it? Find that purpose, that passion. So for me, when I do Find a Tree, and I have a JD MBA, I should be working in corporate America. I should be in some fancy office, but I'm usually in a jail working with the knuckleheads in a high school. This is my book, and I know it's my purpose. My dad died in 2004, and the last thing he said to me, he paid for Columbia out of his pocket. He was an attorney, but he was a second. He paid for Columbia. He paid for private school for me. He never understood Find a Tree. And the last thing he told me one day, he looked up, he had an epiphany. He pointed at me. He said, we should have sent you to public school. But I took it as a joke. Because I know my purpose. It's not to be in some fancy law. It's to do the work I do and Find a Tree. And I know the coalition was part of my purpose. And I know each of our personalities came into play at the right time. If we can have each person here, what they brought to it's like an orchestra, a stew, they had a different flavor. You know, my personality type was the type that could start someone no one around me and not be swayed by that. Barbara was our attorney, the adult in the room. And then, although I wasn't around after 84, everyone here played a role. That was needed. Thank you.
Okay. Really quick on the why divestment piece. Really brief, yeah, I will. It did two things, right? One, the African National Congress at the time was telling everyone in the world to isolate South Africa economically. There was a whole big feeling about constructive engagement and, you know, trying to get people to, no, isolate. We'll take the hit. We understand that it's going to hurt the economy, but we'll take that hit because that's what it's going to take to move the needle in terms of our struggle. And so we got that. And our little way here at Columbia was to force them to try and pull out. And that was where it was. So on the one hand, and I really want to make this right, global and local, right? Globally, that was the struggle. And here locally, that was the piece that we could pick up as students, as a university community, and make a difference in moving forward that piece of the agenda of the folk who are actually struggling on the ground. And it's going to be the same, right, for folks who are doing prison divest and the rest of it, right? So.
Okay, we are about 15 minutes over time. We started a little late. I want to give us a chance for a break between this and the next panel. I want to really encourage people. I know it's a long afternoon on a beautiful Saturday. Take a peek out at the sun and then, you know, come back with us. We'll reconvene at 3:35 for the panel that will go until 5 o'clock. And I want to, again, thank all these amazing organizers here who weren't just organizers at a moment, but have continued to organize. And I want to the brother's point, you know, no episode of struggle, no chapter of struggle is ever enough. I would be more inclined to quote Ella Baker than others, which when her message was that the struggle is eternal. So that idea about Luta Continua, we have to always look for the strategic steps forward, but also look what's happening on the ground in South Africa right now, and that is the struggle of our generation, as well as the role that we played in the 1980s around divestment and ending formal apartheid.
And just a little enticement for you to stay. There is a reception afterwards at 5. There'll be, I don't know what there'll be, but there'll be something. So
there'll be wine.
There'll be wine. There is wine. Yes, I was hoping. All right, there'll be wine. So stay for the wine.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.